They say there's nothing more terrifying than a mother's wrath. Lies. More frightening than a mother's anger is her cold calculation, that dead calm that descends when love has burned out completely, leaving only ashes and precise, unfeeling reasoning. My children decided I was an old, useless asset. The downtown apartment could be sold for a profit, and the elderly woman could be discarded. A clever plan, a one-way cruise, a forged medical note claiming dementia, and a farewell dinner soaked in crocodile tears. They believed they were sending a compliant sheep to the slaughter. They simply didn't know one thing. I heard everything, saw everything, understood everything, and while they chose new cars with the money from my still unsold apartment, I prepared my parting gift, a gift that would turn their cozy, comfortable world into a scorched wasteland. They thought they had bought me a one-way ticket. Naive. That ticket was for them. Want to see empires built on betrayal collapse? Follow along. Justice here is served cold. The table groaned under my signature pies and salads, the very recipes Svetishka, my daughter-in-law, had been trying in vain to get from me for the past 10 years. The champagne Anton, my son-in-law, had bought sparkled in the crystal glasses that had survived from my wedding. Everything was unbearably perfect, like a postcard, a happy family sending off their beloved mother and grandmother on a vacation. My children, Victor and Irina, sat at the head of the table giving toasts. They spoke of how I deserved this cruise, how grateful they were for everything, and how they would miss me during the 3 weeks. I smiled, nodded, even dabbed at my eyes with a handkerchief when Victor got particularly sentimental. Inside, there was nothing. Emptiness. Cold, ringing emptiness, like in a house left frozen in winter. Years teach you that the loudest words of gratitude are often uttered to cover the darkest deeds. I raised my glass. My hands trembled slightly, which I attributed to excitement. Thank you, children. Thank you, my dear. I'm so touched by your care. A lump in my throat made speaking difficult, but I swallowed it. I had swallowed lumps like this my whole life when I sold the summer house to cover Victor's debts, when I babysat my little granddaughter while Irina and her husband vacationed in Spain, when Svetlana criticized my old-fashioned ways. This lump would be my eternal companion. It was Svetlana, my dear daughter-in-law, who struck first. Disguised in her usual clumsy joke, Ludmila Petrovna, she sang, pouring herself more champagne. Be careful with cocktails on the liner, you might confuse the captain for a dementor, like in your movies. She giggled theatrically. Polite, strained laughter filled the table. I felt my blood drain from my face. My blood pressure probably spiked. I smiled as widely as I could, feeling my skin crack at the corners of my mouth. Don't worry, Svetishka, I'm still of sound mind, I said internally. But the real coup, the blow meant to break me completely, came a little later. I went to the kitchen to retrieve the main course, a duck stuffed with apples, roasted since 5 a.m. The door was ajar, and I overheard my daughter Irina whispering to her husband, "Did you talk to her about the phone? Just make sure she drops it in the sea on the first day. The less contact she has, the easier it will be to prove she's lost her mind." The neurologist said, lack of family contact is an important symptom. My world tilted, ringing in my ears. I clutched the doorframe to steady myself. That doctor's visit wasn't a coincidence. It was a cold, calculated plan to get rid of me and take the apartment. A one-way ticket. I always knew cruises went both ways, but apparently mine was an exception. Slowly, deliberately, I exhaled, straightened, and lifted the serving dish. It suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I don't remember how the evening ended, only the fake hugs, like ornaments on a Christmas tree. Cold, icy cheek kisses. Then the click of the front door lock, and I was alone. Silence was deafening. I approached the large hallway mirror, the same one I'd seen on my wedding day. In the reflection was a tired, elderly woman with dimmed eyes. I stared for a few seconds, and then something strange happened. The tears evaporated. They simply vanished. The shoulders burdened with grief straightened. My gaze hardened, focused. No longer was I Ludmila Petrovna, the forgiving mother and grandmother. Someone else was emerging. My eyes fell on the dresser, colorful cruise brochures, and the ticket. Beside them, a small, plain metal key I had taken this morning, a bank deposit box key. My real ticket, a ticket to a new life. Their game was over. Mine was just beginning. If you also believe self-respect matters more than toxic family ties, follow along. Silence filled the apartment. but it was healing, like the calm after a long, exhausting illness. I sat in the old armchair, the one Misha and I bought on our first wedding anniversary, squeaky, worn, endlessly familiar. In it, I had spent thousands of hours holding Victor and then Irina in my arms, knitting their first socks, reading them bedtime stories, and now, in that same chair, I was burying my maternal love. They say it's unnatural for a parent to bury their child, but here, I was burying my love for them. Memory is strange, insistent, showing me images of the past in a new light. At 25, I stood handing in my resignation from graduate school. My gray-haired supervisor shook his head. "Ludmila, your future is brilliant. Your dissertation is almost done." I smiled. I had a son. That's my main dissertation now. I abandoned a career in economics to become a professional mother. I thought it was a safe investment. How wrong I was. At 40, Irina, my beauty, married, white dress, all as it should be. A year later, tearful call. "Mom, we want a mortgage," but lacked the down payment. I pawned my mother's ring, the only memento of her, overnight sleepless. When I gave Irina the money, she glanced at my hand. "Mom, where's the ring?" "Lost." I mumbled something about repair. She forgot instantly. 5 years later, they sold that apartment, bought a bigger one, and didn't invite me. "There's a youth crowd, it'll be boring for you," they said. I swallowed that too. A more recent memory, just 3 years ago, my late husband Mikhail was gravely ill. He looked at me with tired, understanding eyes. "Buddha," he whispered, "your heart is a bottomless well. I've admired it all my life." But they came to him not to drink clean water. They came to see what else they could throw in, testing his depth. I waved it off, told him he exaggerated, that the children loved us. Misha only gave a bitter smile. Love is measured not in words, but in deeds. Remember that. He passed away a month later. After his death, they started coming even more often, not to me, but to my well of strength. Victor urgently needed money for a promising startup. Irina wanted a new car, ashamed of her old one in front of friends. I stayed with their children, canceling my plans, trips to the sanatorium, meetings with friends. I became a function, a free nanny, an unfailing ATM, a personal chef for family gatherings. I gave them everything, my time, my health, my last savings. I thought that was how it should be, that it was a mother's duty. I rose from the chair and approached the window. The city at night glowed with millions of lights. Somewhere in one of those shining boxes, my children were celebrating their victory. They were convinced they had rid themselves of an old, useless mother. They believed they had taken everything from me, but they were wrong. They took only what I allowed. My greatest asset I had kept, my mind, my will, and my memory. Memory of everything they had done, and that memory had now become my most potent weapon. They thought I had given them everything, but they were about to face what was left. Cold realization doesn't strike like lightning. It creeps in slowly, like dampness in an old house. At first, you ignore faint spots on the wallpaper, then smell a hint of rot, and only when water starts dripping from the ceiling do you realize the foundation has long since rotted. My home, my faith in my children, crumbled just like that, slowly and inexorably. I first noticed the spots about 6 months ago. Victor, my busy, business-minded son, suddenly developed a strange interest in my utility bills. "Mom, let me take a general power of attorney," he said, peering over my shoulder as I filled out receipts. "I'll pay everything for you. It's hard for you to go to the post office. It's more convenient this way." I refused, saying I liked walking to the post office. There was something about his tone, too slick, too attentive, that made me uneasy. He wasn't used to caring for my convenience. He was used to exploiting it. Then there was Irina. During one of her rare visits, as she flipped through old photos, she casually asked, "Mom, have you written a will? We should get all your documents in order. You understand, given your age." I joked that I intended to live forever, but her question hung in the air. She wasn't concerned about order. She wanted to secure the ultimate prize, my 3-room apartment downtown, firmly for them. But all of this was only a precursor. The real collapse happened 3 weeks ago. That day divided my life into before and after. I ran out of blood pressure mitigation and went to our district clinic for a refill. The day was busy, the corridors were crowded. Leaving the therapist's office, I froze. At the far end of the corridor, by the door marked neurology, Room 214, Professor Arkadeev I.S., stood my daughter Irina. She was animatedly speaking on the phone, covering her mouth with her hand. I instinctively stepped behind a column. Professor Arkadeev was a local celebrity, specializing in cognitive disorders in the elderly, dementia, Alzheimer's, senile decline. Appointments with him were booked a month in advance. What was my 42-year-old, perfectly healthy daughter doing outside his office? The door opened, and a nurse handed Irina a thick blue folder. She took it, and for a moment, the folder faced me. I couldn't be mistaken. In large printed letters on a label, "Outpatient patient record, Sokolova, Ludmila Petrovna." My name, my surname. I stopped breathing. Blood pounded in my temples so loudly I felt deaf. Irina, oblivious, quickly shoved the folder into her large bag and almost ran toward another exit. I remained behind the column, clutching it with whitened fingers to avoid collapsing. The informational bomb exploded in my mind, destroying everything I believed. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a plan. They had prepared the ground, gathering proof of my supposed incompetence, visits to a trendy neurologist, a falsified medical record, insistent offers to help with documents, and finally, the cherry on top, the perfect trap: send the elderly mother on a journey from which she might not return, or return entirely incapacitated, and quietly claim the inheritance. I don't remember getting home. I moved on autopilot, while the puzzle in my mind assembled. Every detail, every red flag, fell into place. The pain that should have torn me apart never came. Instead, there was crystalline, icy clarity. Clarity like a surgeon looking at an X-ray, spotting a tumor demanding immediate removal. The memory of the blue folder in my daughter's hands became the moment when all self-pity and concern for them died. I sank into the armchair. My hands no longer shook. I picked up the phone and dialed a number long untouched. The ringing seemed endless. Finally, a scratchy but familiar voice answered. "I'm listening, Seaman Markovich." "Hello, this is Ludmila Sokolova, me wife." There was a pause on the other end. "Luda, I wasn't expecting this. What happened?" I drew a deep breath. "Yes, I've made up my mind. Let's launch our project." They say the most important decisions in life are made in complete silence, not in shouts, not in tears, but in the deafening calm after a storm, when the air still smells of ozone and the soul feels like ashes. My conversation with Seaman Markovich was brief, precise, and businesslike. I hung up and froze. Something shifted inside me, turned with a heavy grind like a rusted mechanism, and settled. It was the death of pity, maternal pity, that had made me forgive, understand, and justify them over and over. I had always believed they were my flesh and blood. That evening I understood the truth. To them, I was square meters and a bank account, an immovable asset. My love had not been a gift, but a burdensome obligation to be endured for their future gain. My health was not a cause for joy, only an irritating obstacle delaying the inheritance. They meant no harm, no. It was simpler than that. They wished me non-existent, quietly, legally erased. The voice in my head, the one that had whispered for decades, "They are children, you must forgive," suddenly went silent. Another voice took its place, calm, cold, resembling my late husband's economist tone. It spoke in numbers and facts. "Ludmila," it said, "you've been a good investor your whole life. You invested in education, real estate, stocks. But your main project, children, was not only unprofitable, it was a fraudulent scheme, a financial pyramid with you as the sole contributor." And I realized he was right. I looked at my life not as a mother, but as an auditor. Here were my investments: 20 years of life, 3 sold properties, the summer house, garage, a room in a communal apartment, all my gold, all savings. And the return, false concern, a one-way ticket. The blue folder with my name and my daughter's, hands leaving the dementia specialist's office. The balance didn't add up. At that moment, I ceased to be their mother. I became a creditor, hard, merciless creditor, here to collect debts with interest. No anger, no rage, only cold, clear, winter air determination. I approached the table and took a blank sheet of paper. My hand was steady, my breath even, my back straight. I began drafting a plan, not a plan for revenge, but for asset recovery. First, real estate. The apartment, the main prize they had fought over, had to be removed from play swiftly, quietly, without a trace. Second, finances. All remaining savings accounts had to vanish, unreachable, like water slipping through sand. Third, the legend. My departure, my disappearance, everything had to appear exactly as they wished. They had handed me the perfect scenario. I only had to play my role fully. Fourth, and most important, security. I had to vanish truly, not just for them, but for the world. Lay low and wait for them to make their move. I studied the list, and in my chest, in place of pain and sorrow, arose a new, unfamiliar feeling: control. For the first time in years, I was no longer drifting along with their wishes and demands. I was building the dam, redirecting the river. I thought this would break me completely. How naive. It did not break MIT, reforged me. From soft, pliant clay of maternal love, a cold, sharp blade emerged, ready to strike. We are approaching the moment that will turn everything upside down. Stay, it gets even more intense. Seaman Markovich lived in an old professor's apartment near the university, walls lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. The air smelled of aged paper, fine tobacco, and strong tea. He was my late husband's peer, friends since their student days, gray-haired, lean, with piercing, vivid eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. He asked no unnecessary questions when I called. "Come, Luda, I'll be waiting," he said. I explained everything. The blue folder in my daughter's hands, the one-way cruise, my decision. I spoke evenly, without emotion, as if reading a financial report. He listened silently, nodding occasionally. His long, slender fingers tapped the lid of an antique box. When I finished, he went to the window and gazed at the street for a long time. "Misha always said you let them have too much," he finally said without turning. "They'll devour her, Seema, if she doesn't show her teeth in time." He seemed right. He was right about everything, I whispered. Now I understood it too. Seaman Markovich turned to me. No pity in his eyes, only respect. "Good," he said matter-of-factly. "We have little time. The plan must be flawless. Do you want to simply reclaim what's yours or punish them?" "I want justice, Seema," I replied. "And sometimes justice looks like punishment." He became the brain of my operation, not just an old economics professor, but a brilliant practitioner who had advised many factory and bank owners in the 90s. He knew all the loopholes, all the hidden pitfalls. He was that quiet depth where the most dangerous creatures lurk. He found a buyer for my apartment, an anonymous entity that could not arouse suspicion. The buyers were a closed, Luxembourg-based investment fund specializing in Eastern European real estate, a faceless, opaque structure, nearly impossible to trace. The transaction went through a trusted notary, the price slightly below market for speed. "Speed and silence are our main allies," Seaman said. The day came, 3 days before my intended departure. The morning was gray and rainy. Seaman and I sat in the notary's reception. I wore my finest suit, reserved for the most formal occasions. Today was such an occasion, a triumph of justice. The notary, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, brought out the documents. A thick stack meant to erase my past life, the deed of sale, a donation of all remaining funds to the anonymous charitable foundation Seaman oversaw, and a general power of attorney granting him control of all future financial inflows. I took the pen. Inside, there was neither fear nor doubt, only silence. Years teach that the most important decisions are made not in tears, but in complete stillness. I signed each page firmly and confidently. The signature beneath the sale of the apartment I had lived in for 40 years, where my children grew up, was as precise as the rest. I was not selling a home. I was amputating painful memories. When the final signature was in place, the notary took the documents and stepped out to apply the seals. Seaman and I remained alone in the office. He studied me for a long moment, then quietly, almost in a whisper, asked, "Luda, do you understand? There's no turning back. This is the point of no return." I lifted my eyes to him. For the first time in many days, the corners of my lips twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "The way back leads to the abyss, Seema. I am moving only forward." Our refuge was not Seaman Markovich's old dacha. In a small village 100 kilometers from the city stood a modest but sturdy wooden house, encircled by a high, solid fence, and centuries-old pines. It was quiet here, smelling of pine and damp earthen, ideal place to disappear. Seaman brought me here at night, right after the notary visit. My cruise wasn't set to begin for another 2 days. In those 2 days, I erased all traces, disconnected the city phone, paid all bills for the month, and left the keys with the neighbor to water the plants. Everything had to appear as though I were truly preparing for a long journey. On the evening of my supposed departure, Seaman and I sat on the Glaston veranda. He brewed strong tea with thyme. I baked a simple apple charlotte. Rain pattered against the windows. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. In that quiet, Seaman walked me through the financial intricacies of our plan. I was an economist, but his combinations were advanced mathematics. Listen carefully, Luda, he began, sketching diagrams on a napkin. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock Moscow time, the apartment funds hit your transit account. At exactly 9:05, I transferred the full amount, per your power of attorney, to a brokerage account. We don't hold it there a minute. Half the sum goes to non-personal government, bonds untraceable and untouchable in most civil claims. That's our stabilization fund. He sipped tea and continued, eyes gleaming with excitement. The other half is our hammer. We convert it into 3 cryptocurrencies through a Swiss exchange. Don't ask which ones, that's my trade secret. The wallet keys will stay here. He tapped the old wooden box always on his desk. Physical storage, no cloud. Even if your children hire the world's best hackers, they find nothing. To them, this money simply does not exist, it has vanished. Listening, I felt a strange thrill, like reading a gripping detective novel. Only the heroine was me. And what about me? I asked. They'll search for me. Of course they will. Seaman smirked. But not right away. First, they'll let you disappear for a week, maybe 2, feigning panic, calling the cruise company. When they realize the apartment is gone, the real hunt begins, but by then, you'll be far away. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. I'll stay here, in this house. I want to be present when the trap snaps. I want to hear the squeak of the mice discovering the cheese is gone. Seaman Markovich regarded me carefully. It's dangerous, Luda. They could find you. Let them, I replied. My plan wasn't escape. It was to watch them face their defeat. I would wait. The cruise tickets my children had handed me with pomp lay on the table. Glossy, bright, gold embossed. They thought they were sending me on a one-way journey. Unaware, I had already abandoned their ship and charted my own course. They assumed they played chess against a tired old pawn. They hadn't yet realized I was the queen. Sweeping all their pieces off the board in one move, I picked up the tickets and held them to the fire. The paper curled black as it burned. For a moment, golden letters shimmered in the ash. Unforgettable journey. I smiled bitterly. The journey would indeed be unforgettable, especially for my children. The first week I savored the silence. I wandered the pine forest, read books I had missed over 30 years, and slept 10 hours a night. I did not think of them, knowing they did not think of me either. They had given me time to vanish. Seaman called once daily at the same time to confirm everything was on track. The funds had been successfully transferred and dissolved into the global financial ocean. My fortress was built, the moat dug, the bridges raised. I waited for the assault. 8 days after my departure, as predicted by Seaman, the attack began. Victor and Irina sat in the meeting room of an expensive real estate agency. Coffee steamed in porcelain cups before them. Dressed impeccably, they performed their roles as grieving but responsible children. Understand, Victor told the agent, a distinguished man in a tailored suit. Mom's always been eccentric, and lately she's failed entirely. Doctors deliver a bleak diagnosis. Here are all the documents. Irina nodded, rolling her eyes tragically. We worry for her. She's left on this cruise, hardly saying goodbye. Her phone is off. We must take matters into our own hands. The apartment must be sold to ensure proper care in a quality facility. She placed the same blue folder from Professor Arkady on the desk. The realtor nodded sympathetically and began typing. Let's check the property in the national database for encumbrances. Sokolova, Ludmila Petrovna, Lesnaya Street, 5, apartment 42. Correct? Yes, correct, Victor confirmed impatiently, already calculating the expected profit. The realtor frowned, fingers frozen over the keyboard. He glanced again at the screen, then at Victor and Irina. Excuse me, there appears to be an error, he said slowly. What error? Irina demanded irritably. The realtor removed his glasses and rubbed his nose. According to the National Registry, this property no longer belongs to you. It was sold 2 weeks ago. Silence filled the room. Victor and Irina exchanged glances. What nonsense! Victor exclaimed first. We are her children. She couldn't have sold it without our knowledge. The realtor swiveled the monitor toward them. The certificate owner, a closed European investment fund. The transaction was clean, fully registered. I'm very sorry. The collapse unfolded in slow motion, like a car crash on replay. They stormed out of the office. Irina screamed at Victor, waving her hands. It's your fault. I told you. You should have forced the power of attorney. You missed everything. Victor, pale as a sheet, tried to respond, lips trembling. They frantically dialed my number again and again. Subscriber unavailable or out of range. Those words struck like a death sentence. That evening, Victor sat in his office's business, his beautiful life, his status all built on the promise of future proceeds from my apartment sale. Now the ground beneath him had vanished. His phone rang again. Unknown number. Enraged, he grabbed the receiver. Hello, he shouted. A pause, then a calm, steady, chillingly familiar voice. Minen hello. Son, seems you're having some trouble with real estate. A heavy, ringing silence hung over the line. I heard Victor gasping for air, jerking like a fish flung onto the shore. I pictured his pale, blotchy face, eyes darting in panic. I waited. I had learned to wait. Mom. He finally choked out, his voice strange, hoarse. Mommy, is that you? Where are you? We're going crazy with worry. We thought something happened to you. The performance continued, pathetic and unconvincing, but they had no other option, no need for this charade. Victor, I said evenly, articulating each word. My voice was calm, perhaps too calm. Let's not waste my time, or yours. I assume you've checked the new status of my former property. That sentence struck like a whip. The mask of the caring son fell away instantly. What have you done? He shrieked, falsetto cracking. Are you out of your mind? Where's the money from the apartment? You had no right to sell it. That's our inheritance. First, Victor, inheritance is claimed after death. As you can see, I'm very much alive. Second, it was my property, and I disposed of it as I saw fit. I simply closed an old, unprofitable asset. Asset, he gasped in fury. You call our home an asset? Exactly, I confirmed with icy calm. And, as practice showed, it was extremely risky and toxic. Any savvy investor in my position would have gotten rid of it long ago. I heard a noise on the line. Then Irina's hysterical voice joined. He had evidently put the call on speaker. Mom, what are you doing? She sobbed. Think Sveta will leave Vitya. They have a mortgage. Anton threatens divorce. We were counting on this money to support his business. You're destroying our families. Don't you have a heart? Manipulation, their final card. Once, it would have worked flawlessly. I would have cried with her, promised to fix everything, to give everything back. But now, inside me, there was not a quivering lump of nerves, but a cold, smooth stone. Irina, I said evenly, your calculations are your business risks. You bet on an unreliable funding source. Your investment failed. This happens every day in the market. Diversification, not putting all eggs in one basket, was required. Both fell silent, stunned. They didn't know how to speak to this new version of their mother. They were used to this soft, forgiving woman and encountered a heartless financial analyst instead. You're not a mother, you're a monster, Victor hissed. You're right, I agreed. Your mother died the day you sent her on that one-way cruise with a fake dementia certificate in her pocket. You killed her yourselves. I'm merely the executor of her estate, and I've managed it with maximum efficiency. But you are our mother, Irina shouted in a final desperate attempt to reach my feelings. I paused, letting the words hang, then die. That role in my life is closed. I finally said, it's expired. And now, listen carefully. Both of you, do not call me again. If I deem it necessary, I will contact you. I have many matters to attend. I pressed the end call button. I sat in the quiet of my new home. Pines whispered outside. My chest felt calm. 100 kilometers away, their world was collapsing, while mine had, for the first time in years, order. About a month passed. The phone remained silent. The stillness was deceptive. I knew it. It was the lull before the decisive battle. I learned to live in my small home, organizing my life. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading, evenings by the fireplace, sorting old papers and photographs. I did what I should have done long ago, took inventory of my life. They arrived on a Saturday evening, I sat on the veranda with tea and a book when an unfamiliar black car appeared on the dirt road, raising dust clouds. It stopped at my gate. My heart did not flinch. I calmly set the book aside and waited. Victor and Irina stepped out. They looked dreadful. Victor was thin, gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. His expensive jacket hung on him like a garment on a hanger. Irina was makeup-free, face swollen from crying. They resembled two bankrupt aristocrats. I didn't move. I watched as they opened the gate and slowly walked toward me. They expected anything, shouting, reproaches, hysteria. My calm, my stillness, disarmed them. They stopped a few steps from the porch. Victor broke first. His face twisted. He fell to his knees in the dirt. "Mom," he cried, not in anger, but desperation. "Mom, forgive us, fools that we are. We understand now. We were blind, ungrateful creatures. Forgive us, if you can." He crawled toward me, trying to grasp my hand to kiss it. I pulled away. Irina stood, behind, crying, hands covering her face, a well-rehearsed spectacle, the final act of tragedy, the repentant children. I watched my son, at my feet with nothing, no gloating, no pity, only the cold curiosity of an entomologist observing insect behavior. "We'll give it all back, Mom," he continued, face streaked with tears. "I'll sell the car. Sveta will sell her jewelry. We'll work 3 jobs. We'll pay you as much as you demand. Just forgive us. We can't live without you." He spoke long and tangled, choking on words and tears, professing love, sleepless nights, shame. I remained silent. I let him speak, emptying all lies until the last drop. When he finally ran out of strength and fell silent, the moment of truth arrived. He looked at me with one last desperate hope and said the very words that sealed his fate. "Mom, I understand everything now. Forgive us. You'll at least give us some of the money, just to cover the urgent debts at first. And then, we swear we'll return every penny." "I'm listening, Seema," I said, watching the flames dance. "Let's start with Victor," he began. As we suspected, his promising startup was a house of cards. He took loans from 3 banks under verbal guarantees, using the expected proceeds from the sale of your apartment as collateral. When the lenders realized there was no collateral, they filed a joint claim. The court ruled yesterday's bankrupt. All his assets, including the car and his share of his wife's apartment, are going under the hammer. He paused. And his wife Svetlana filed for divorce and asset division the very day after he returned from you. She's pragmatic. She wanted to save what she could. So our Victor is now not only bankrupt but freshly divorced, registered at a former business partner's temporary apartment. Domino effect. The first tile fell, knocking down the next. And Irina asked calmly. "Similar story, but with the feminine twist," Semyon continued. "Her husband Anton also relied on your inheritance to fund his business. When he realized there'd be no cash flow, he packed up and vanished, leaving Irina a farewell note and all their joint debts. The bank has already sent a notice about the overdue mortgage. If she doesn't pay within a month, the apartment will be seized and she has no money. She was fired for constant absences and emotional outbursts." I stayed silent, seeing the scene clearly, as if I were watching a film. Victor, once so proud of his status, now hiding from creditors. Irina, who feared being seen in her old car, now terrified of eviction. Svetlana and Anton, their loyal life partners, turned out to be ordinary predators fleeing a sinking ship. Their perfect families, built on my money and their expectations, crumbled to dust once the source dried up. They even fought, Semyon added, blaming each other. He claimed her dementia document scheme ruined everything. She accused him of rushing greedily and scaring you. Seems even their brotherly love didn't survive. He paused, then asked the real question, not as a financier, but as a friend. "Luda, do you regret it?" "Not at all." I shifted my gaze from the fire to the dark window reflecting the room, and my serene face. Outside, the first snow was falling, quietly blanketing the ground in white. "We regret mistakes, Seema," I whispered, "wrong decisions, but this was the only right decision of my life." Nearly a year passed. The first snow I had seen from Semyon's cabin melted, giving way to spring greenery, and then the heat of summer. I hadn't stood still either. I sold the old house that had been my fortress, returning the money to Semyon with immense gratitude. He resisted at first, but I insisted. My war was over. I no longer needed fortresses. I needed a home. I found it half 100 kilometers from my past life, in a small, sunlit coastal town. Salt, grilled fish, and blooming magnolias filled the air. I bought a tiny apartment with a balcony overlooking the sea and used the remaining funds to fulfill a dream almost forgotten. I opened a small second-hand bookstore with a cafe on the ground floor, calling it Quiet Harbor. My life now consisted of simple, yet profoundly important things. Mornings I opened the shop, brewed coffee, whose aroma mingled with the scent of old books. Locals and a few tourists visited. I knew almost all my customers by name. We spoke not of dollar rates or real estate prices, but of books, the sea, and the weather. I was no longer an ATM, a nanny, or a function. I was Ludmila Petrovna, the keeper of a quiet harbor, serving the best coffee in town. One day, as I studied my reflection in the shop window, I realized I barely recognized the woman. Staring back, the perpetual crease of worry between my brows had vanished. Lines around my lips, once drawn tight with tension, had softened. Looking back at me was an older but calm woman, eyes sparkling with the southern sun's light. I thought that after all I had done, I would feel guilt or emptiness. I was wrong. I had found peace. Not the triumph of a victor, but the serenity of someone finally home. I had achieved double liberation, selling a house full of past ghosts and severing ties that had stifled me. Constantine, the cheerful postman, came every day for a cup of espresso. One day, he handed me not just the papers, but a real envelope. The address was written in an unfamiliar, angular hand. My heart fluttered. It was from my granddaughter Anya, Irina's daughter, who had started university in another city last year. I sat at my window table and opened it. The letter was brief. Hello, Grandma. I don't know if you will receive this. Semyon Markovich gave me this address. I just want you to know I know everything Dad told me when he was drunk. I haven't spoken to them since. I'm ashamed of them. I'd love to visit you during the holidays, if you allow, just to hug you. Your granddaughter, Anya. I read the letter and looked out at the sparkling sea. A tear slid down my cheek, not of sorrow, not of resentment, but a tear of quiet, bright joy. The old, rotting tree of my family had fallen, but a young, healthy shoot had reached the sun. They say forgiveness is for the strong. I think sometimes the greatest strength is to say at the right moment, enough, and take what is yours. I'm nearly 70, and for the first time in my life, I owe nothing to anyone. And you know what? It's the best feeling in the world. If you've suffered for your family too, write to me. I will no longer remain silent. Here it was, the manipulator finally exposed. Bingo. He didn't pity me. He pitied his debts. His tears weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of fear before his creditors. In that moment, the last, most fragile thread still binding me to him snapped. I rose slowly. Both of them flinched. Yes, I said quietly, yet loud enough for them to catch every word. I've left something for you. A greedy, impatient hope flickered across Victor's face. He evidently thought his performance had succeeded. He expected me to hand him a bankbook or the keys to a new safe deposit. I walked into the house. They stayed on the porch, waiting. I approached the fireplace, where an old carved box rested on the mantel. In it, I had kept the most precious things my life had held. Victor's first booties, Rena's lock of hair, our wedding photos, letters, my family archive. I lifted the box and returned to the veranda, holding it out to Victor. His hands trembled. He fumbled, hastily opening the lid, expecting gold or stacks of cash. But inside was only gray, lifeless ash. He stared at it, confused, then lifted his gaze to me, wild-eyed. This is all that remains of your childhood photos and my memories, I explained calmly. I burned them yesterday. This is your only inheritance. Now leave my land. They departed without another word. Victor, unsteady, rose from his knees. His face mirrored the ash-colored box he could not let go of. Irina stared at me with wordless, animal-like terror. They climbed into their black car and vanished as swiftly as they had appeared. I remained alone on the porch, inhaling the cool, evening air. I felt no triumph, no hatred, only an immense, all-consuming relief, as if a heavy, wet coat I had worn for 68 years had been lifted from my shoulders. After that came true silence. A week passed, then a month, and late autumn arrived. Trees shed their leaves. Frost dusted the grass in the mornings. My life settled into a calm, measured rhythm. I knew the domino effect had begun. All that remained was to wait for Markovich, to bring me the battlefield report. That call came on one of the cold November evenings. I sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, logs crackling in the fire. "Hello, Luda." Semyon's voice was calm as always over the line. "I have news for you, financial analytics, so to speak.